see so many people interested in the interface between ink and shrinks. As a shrink said to me today, I'm shrink, she's ink. So and we have a joke, which is all the writers are going to get together and I'm going to blow this. Figure out how much to charge you for a 45-minute reading. That was Bob Reeves. All the readers reading tonight are part of our Stony Brook Southampton family. They're very close to our hearts. They've been part of the conference for a very long time. And we even have the godfather himself reading tonight, Bob Reeves, who's a co-host of Stony Brook Southampton. So we're happy to have him. Our program is expanding to be a graduate arts campus. We're expanding beyond just writing and literature. We're now offering an MFA in theater, and starting this summer, we're going to have a visual arts facet to our conference. So suddenly we have really gorgeous brochures. We're also offering 2 conferences overseas, one in Florence and one in Kenya. Unfortunately, Christian McLean, who runs the one in Kenya, can't be here tonight because he's having dinner with Richard Leakey, poor man. Our editor-in-chief, Luann Walker, is here in the audience. Luann published 2 of the pieces that are being read tonight, and we're very happy to have her here. I love both writing and therapy. I love the inner life, and I love the task of trying to communicate that in any way, whether it's to another human being in a closed office or to a blank page. And I'm really excited to see what all these writers have done with the task of communicating anything about the interface of those 2 things on paper. So tonight we're going to start with Dan Menaker, whose piece is about the beginning of therapy, and we're going to end on Meg Wolitzer, whose piece is about the sad month of August, and therapists are gone. So both Dan and Meg have slightly longer pieces. I want it that way, and in between I'll be mini short pieces. So please welcome Dan.
Hi, thank you, Magdalene, and thank you to the Stony Brook family for inviting me for adopting me fairly recently, although I've been part of the conference for quite a while. It is a family. It's a very interesting group of writers and students and courses and Kenyans and God knows what all, but it's so welcoming and it's so nice to be here. I'm so grateful to be to have been invited and to be part of it. I'm going to read from a book called The Treatment, which I published in 1998, God help me, and it was made into a very small independent movie, shown once on Virgin Atlantic Airlines. It did open in New York, and then it closed. It had Famke Janssen in it, and Ian Holm. And if you ever want to see if it's okay, you know, it's not bad, so take a look at it. Now, I'm just going to read 2 short sections of the hero. The protagonist's name is Jake Singer, and the analyst, who is a Cuban Catholic, is named Ernesto Morales, and you could translate that. And Jake hasn't had sex in a long time, and now he has. And my accent for Dr. Morales has suffered very badly over the years. It used to sound vaguely Hispanic, but now it's more like Punjabi. So anytime you hear not a normal American accent, you'll know it's Dr. Morales. But it might be Apache for all I know. And why are you smiling so broadly this morning, Mr. Singer? Dr. Morales asked the next day as I stretched out on the gray leatherette couch with the gray leatherette jelly roll headrest. He had ushered me in with his customary grin and his ironical-looking demi-bow, and had then sat down in the gray leatherette chair, where he started fiddling with his answering machine. there we were, washed up again on those two tiny, barren atolls, about to cast our lines into the great sea of the unconscious. Well, I met someone over the weekend, I said. She's very nice. Good, Dr. Silence. Then, did you fuck her? The question had the honey-tone characteristic of his sexual interrogations. I beg your pardon? Please take your penis out from under the English bowling hat, Mr. Singer, Dr. Morales said tiredly. He was still fussing with the answering machine, which suddenly emitted 5 seconds worth of backward chipmunkese. Did you fuck her? Bowler hat, I said. And as a matter of fact, I did. And did you, as a matter of fact, enjoy it? Greatly. Greatly? Is there an echo in here? What's wrong with greatly, for Christ's sake? I enjoyed it a lot. Ah, better. How many times did you fuck her? 2, I don't know. Don't you even want to know her name? Don't you? All in good time, Mr. Singer. You and I are not on a date at the opera. Here we do not have to comment on how very like a camel is the cloud overhead, or raise our pinky when we drink our tea. Did she have a climax? I don't know. She said she did. Jesus, this is like a high school locker room. Precisely. It is lamentable but true that this is the last time for many people to discuss these important matters. Now, what kinds of noises did she make? What? Perhaps you do not know because you have these episodes of deafness. Now listen, you can't, no, you listen. Sorry. No, you listen, Mr. Singer. It is you who cannot. You cannot bring yourself to acknowledge that you think in such terms and to speak frankly to me about this sexual experience. You are ashamed, and so you force me to interrogate you, so that you can express the shock you feel toward yourself. Not only do you claim that you do not have to sit down to move your bowels, like the rest of us poor mortals, you claim not to move them at all, and then you react with disgust after compelling me to move them for you. A neat trick, you must admit, I said. And why are you associating sexuality with defecation, by the way? Ah, so now we have swimming into the session the red herring of your alleged humor, followed by a touch of turnabout is fair play. Love has pitched his mansion in the place of excrement, as your esteemed butler Yeats has reminded us so recently. Is it not? We sparred a bit longer, and then Dr. Morales resumed his extraction of graphic details. After the most deviant of these specifics, which he received in reverential silence, I added, and she told me to make sure to tell you about it. Dr. Morales awoke from his trance with conviction renewed. You see, he said, she knows what is important. She and I are on the same frequency. He added, forlornly, oh, so you have discussed our work with this woman. Later we shall have to analyze why you have broken our agreement. He was always doing this, adding another waltz to our therapeutic dance card, as if he wanted the music never to end. Now, would you tell me what positions you used? I left the session feeling like a porn potboiler that had been thumbed through by some creep in search of the good parts. And then a little bit later, he has been with this young woman again, and he comes back, and he has lent her some money. Of course I understand, Dr. Morales said the next morning, when, about 15 minutes into the session, I told him I had lent Samira some money and wouldn't have his payment until Friday. I understand that you have finally worked up your courage to sleep with a whore, and now you have to pay her. Hey, hold on a second. I can't believe I'm on the moon, Mr. Singer. I'm on the moon. I'll say I muttered. What? Nothing. I am on the moon looking at the earth through my shiny new telescope. I zoom in on New York City and then on the west side, and what do I see? What do I see? I see a man having sex with a woman. And then in the morning, through my telescope, I have seen a man give the woman a check as she is leaving. Now, you must tell me what interpretation I have to put on these events. But this is nutty. You're not on the moon. You're here in this office with me, and I'm telling you it wasn't like that at all. There was no arrangement about money or anything like that. Did she know you had money, Mr. Singer? No. Well, yes, actually. She asked how I could be a school teacher and pay for psychoanalysis at the same time. But, so she established that you had at least some money. You know, there are all kinds of whores, Mr. Singer. And you have discovered for yourself during the summer, including those who do not know they are whores. Yeah, but whores don't give back the money they paid. You are so certain that this woman will repay the money? Of course she will. I wish I could share your confidence. Perhaps you would like to discuss why are you so offended by the suggestion that you might have paid for a sex. You know, it has happened once or twice in the world before, without this sort of anger and shame. No, damn it, you're the one who's angry, I said. I didn't know where the idea had come from, and I wasn't even sure what I meant. And so now you've put on the armor of rage in order to resist. No, you're the one who's enraged. You're the one who feels like a whore. I pay you, your patients pay you for this kind of relationship. Now I come and tell you for the first time in more than a year that I'll be 2 days late with your fucking fee because I lent the money to someone else, and you get so angry that you construe my relationship with this person, the first nice thing that has happened to me in quite a while, I might add, the same way you secretly construe your patients' relationships with you. Angry and jealous, you're jealous. The money is only the paper on the surface. You know I'm responsible about your fee. You've been slighted. Your customer has put someone else before you. There was a long silence, after which Dr. Morales, sounding distant, sepulchral, as if he passed over and were trying to communicate with the living, said, "In my judgment, Mr. Singer, you are projecting your view of me as a prostitute onto me because you wish to disown it. No, I am sorry, I am lower than a prostitute, for you have paid the prostitute." DC's my judgment, which of course you have already made sure to dismiss, if not ridicule, this morning and frequently. But let us assume, for the sake of argument, which is after all what you so often wish to substitute for analysis, let us assume that you are correct and that it is I who is angry and jealous. Then my question is, of what benefit is your interpretive triumph to you? What sort of ground have you gained with these counter-offensive, as you no doubt do it? I shall tell you, he went on, you become impervious to change. If you confront me, you do not have to suffer the pain of confronting yourself. This is your analysis, not mine, but your knowledge of your conflicts and your mastery of them will grow by neither an inch nor an ounce if you pursue these tactics. If you busy your mind with a war against me, you will never make peace with yourself. Well then, if I'm incapable of doing analysis, of making any I did not say that, Mr. Singer. Perhaps the saddest of all and most insulting and demeaning to me is that you refuse to admit the value of what you have managed to, despite yourself, to accomplish here. Your failure to pay me my fee on time is one aspect of this denial. Yeah, and your rigidity about the money shows a pretty shaky sense of self-respect, I said. Am I catching on? Listen, I'll cash in one of the CDs after school today and pay you on Friday. I'm sorry I missed the payment, but I really don't. And the last thing you will admit is that this new sexual liaison of yours, whatever its nature, would have been out of the question for you when we started our work. You're taking the credit? But just tell me, how did it come about? Well, you were too preoccupied with the endocrinology of it to find out. Please, try not to be a smart Alex. How did it come about? Alec, I said. I met her in the museum on Sunday and asked her out to dinner. Well, would you have asked her out to dinner under the same circumstances a year ago? You do not see that. Why must you cash a CD? You will certainly lose some of the interest. Dr. Morales' voice has suddenly lost its otherworldliness. Well, the trust fund is in CDs, 5 of them, $10,000 each. And what other instruments do you have? Instruments? You mean investments? None. I told you this before. It's all in CDs. Surely you are joking. For how many years has it been this way? 10, since I turned 21. I just roll them over. Now really, Mr. Singer, you must diversify. Do you have any idea how much money you have already lost? Perhaps we may talk about this in the next session. The time is up for today. And a good thing, too, I thought. I might have gotten up and hit him if he had gone on a second longer. Next session, next life, I said to myself as I walked out.
Longer than what I'm reading you. I'm like this sorbet between courses. So what you need to know is that in this story, the main character is following this advice book called The Guide, which is a dating manual, and the authors have kind of come to life in her world, like in her imagination, but they're on the elevator with her. And after therapy, I'm on the elevator when Bonnie says, "That was great." "What?" I say. "You kept the vow, don't tell your therapist about the guide." "Because I want her to think I'm improving," I say. "I'm hoping that one day she'll say I'm all better and don't need to come back anymore." "That same day, your dry cleaner will recommend hand washing," Faye says, brushing her hair.
Magdalene said earlier that how much should you pay for a 45-minute reading? I just want you to know that some of us still read for 15 minutes. This is a piece that appeared in the New York Times about 7 years ago, and all you really need to know about it is that it was scheduled deliberately to appear at the end of July. That is just before. He's standing outside his townhouse on a Sunday afternoon, hands on hips, wearing a sweatshirt, staring up at a tree. What the hell is he thinking? It's a question I've often asked about him. It's a question I used to ask him all the time. It's a question to which I've never received an answer. He's my analyst. Did I say is? I meant was. From the fall of 1991 to the fall of 2001, 3 or 4 times a week, I lay on the couch in his office and talked to the ceiling and languished in silence and, from time to time, wondered what he was thinking. Out loud, I wondered. His answer, as anyone who has ever ventured into psychoanalysis will know, was always the same. Some variation on, what do you think I'm thinking? Fair enough. The question of what he was thinking inevitably led me to identify what I thought he was thinking, which inevitably led me to recognize that what I thought he was thinking was, in fact, what I was thinking, and that's psychoanalysis in a nutshell. Still, it's one thing to ask the question in an analytic setting. It's quite another to ask it on the street where you live, literally. When I entered analysis, his office was in the Village, and my apartment was on the Upper East Side. Our paths did not cross. Then he moved to the Upper East Side, taking his office with him, but still our paths did not cross. Then he enrolled his son in my son's preschool. Our paths crossed. Fleetingly at first at a parent's cocktail party, also at a dad's pancake breakfast where I got to watch my analyst flip flapjacks. Not, however, at the school auction because he didn't attend, but that evening while writing a check at the ticket pickup desk, I spotted his son's first name alongside a list of school parents. It was the same first name, I couldn't help notice, as that of my younger son, who was born before his, and whose name I had mentioned innumerable times while staring at the ceiling in his office. It gave us something to talk about, I guarantee. Plenty of opportunity for me to ask, what the hell were you thinking? As I say, I'm no longer in analysis, but 2 years ago I moved into an Upper East Side building that's around the corner and 1 block over from his building. Now our paths cross all the time. Even when I try my hardest not to let them, they cross. One morning, taking my younger son to school, I saw my former analyst walking ahead of me up Lexington Avenue in the rain. Well, walking might be an overstatement. Strolling, perhaps, slowly, window shopping slowly, in the rain, did I mention? What was he thinking? I didn't want to pass him and have to engage in excruciating banter, but I also didn't want to get any wetter than I already was. And so I took a deep breath and gripped my son's hand tighter and picked up the pace, nodding hello when I caught up, introducing him to my son as if he didn't already know his name, and explaining how I moved recently just around the corner from him, and that's why our paths are now crossing all the time. Funny, isn't it? I gotta go. And it's not just our paths that cross. My wife's path also crosses his. You'll never guess who was sitting in front of me at the movies, she'll whisper on the cell phone calling from the lobby of an 86th Street theater. You'll never guess who I just ran into on York Avenue, she'll shout to me from our home phone, calling the hotel where I'm staying in San Francisco, knowing that news like this absolutely must traverse the continent without delay. I don't have to guess. I know her tone. Not only is it the same tone I've heard her use before, it's the same tone I hear in my own head when my path crosses my analyst's. It's a tone, I imagine, all analysts hear in their heads when their paths cross those of their analysts. It is, I think, a tone of urgency, but not just any urgency. It's a particular kind of urgency, one born of intimacy. It's the tone you might hear in your head if the person whose path you were crossing was a former lover. There she is, you might find yourself thinking in such a circumstance. The one person on this street right now who knows me intimately, who knows my every secret, who knows me as well as I know myself, more so maybe. Which would raise the question, what is she thinking? Which would raise another question, what do you think she's thinking? Silence. Does it matter what I think? You tell me, does it? Should it? I mean, it's not like we've been together in a while. We both moved on, so why should it matter? Silence. Yes, it matters. Why, do you think? Because she knows everything about me. So she knows. What does she know? Everything. And is that so bad? Silence. You know, you're right. You're absolutely right. It shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter. She's just a person. Just one more person on the street. Sure, a person who happens to know me intimately, maybe better than I know myself. Okay, definitely better than I know myself, but still just a person, right? Right. Here's what I think. I've got this person in my life, and then I don't, and then I move on. What could possibly be clearer? In fact, next time I see my ex on the street, ex-analyst, I mean, here's what I'm going to tell him. Oh, sure, I know, it's easy for me to say now, at the end of July, when I can safely guess he's going away for a month to Wellfleet or wherever, but just wait until after Labor Day. Just wait until the next time our paths cross. I'm not going to walk past his building and pretend not to notice him staring up at a tree. I'm not going to nod politely and smile as I squeeze past him on the M86. I'm not going to sit at home and take it when my wife calls and says she spied him sniffing cantaloupes at Christie's. Instead, I'm going to march right up to him and say, you know what? I see you all the time, and I always wonder what you're thinking, but now I realize it doesn't matter. I don't care what you're thinking. You're just this person. This person who happens to know a lot about me, sure, but so what? We both moved on, so why should it matter? It shouldn't. It doesn't. So there, I've said it. Now, what do you think of that? To which I suspect his answer will be silence, at least at first, and then alas, I know what he'll say. What do you think I think of that? I'm not standing here to milk applause, I'm standing here to introduce Bob Reeves.
Thank you so much. I wanted to thank Magdalene again for organizing this series. We have a couple more evenings, and I hope you will join us again. And also thank my colleagues and employees for letting me attach myself to your distinguished coattails. I'm reading for something called The Eulogist, which is a novella that was published in TSR a couple of years ago. And actually, I'm the publisher of the Southampton Review, and so I had to step down while this was being published for conflict of interest. And this kind of stepping down was, greeted with a real shock in our community. This is Luann's baby. The shock was that no one knew I was the publisher. Because I really don't. Luann does everything, and she's amazing, and everyone knows that. So this is sort of based on a character, Jack Glover, who is a New Yorker and writes a sex column for a magazine. This was kind of 70s, 80s piece. And he thinks this is full of irony, and he's also kind of cracking up. And this, the eulogist, his father is dying, and so he is going back south to visit his father, and while he is there, has a fairly intense sexual relationship with an addict stripper. And the basis of this relationship is an exchange of pharmaceuticals. And, Jack, who has a rather bad habit of pilfering his father's morphine, and so that's and it's a lovely story. It must have. It has actually it has many fairly depraved sex scenes, and I am sad to report to you that none of them appear in this passage with a therapist, which I'm going to read. So I apologize in advance for that. So this is just a brief 3-page recollection. Back to the time, this is will be dated to the time when Prozac was the antidepressant of choice. So it's been a while. The night before his father's funeral, once his mother was in bed, Jack Glover left the small house and drove Big Sam's pickup truck north along the freeway toward a small town called Docena, a town of dangerous reputation, a town where white men had knife fights in bars. It was to one such bar that Jack was headed. Although his time in the bar had never been disrupted by a knife fight, his very first visit had been marked by an event equally out of the ordinary. He had fallen in love with a woman who worked there. In the past 4 months, these midnight excursions had become part of his routine. Many times he had taken just these roads, made just these turns minutes after leaving his father's bedside. A few times, as now, he ventured out just hours after the long trip from New York. Despite the lack of sleep, Jack felt curiously alert. He simply wasn't tired. As he drove, thoughts of medicine were still in his head, but the medicine he found himself contemplating was not Big Sam's, that's his father's name, but his own. What passed through his mind was his interview with Dr. Keenan, the psychiatrist, in the suite of offices on Park Avenue. The doctor had asked a series of questions to determine the source of a depression that had gripped Jack and from which he suffered. From Jack's answers, Dr. Keenan would propose a therapeutic strategy. If the depression was biological, Dr. Keenan would reward him with a prescription of Prozac. If it was situational, he would probably suggest that Jack continue a talking cure. But if it were determined that Jack's depression was severe, and that it derived both from his biochemistry and his situation, Dr. Keenan was prepared to recommend an appropriate residential facility where Jack might receive appropriate care. Of these options, Jack preferred the one that would require from him the fewest words and the least money. He was eager for the pills. So Dr. Keenan asked questions and Jack answered, elaborately describing the daily cycle and duration of his moods, the racing of his mind, his thoughts of suicide. Just ideation, Dr. Keenan asked? Jack nodded. I haven't taken practical steps, just thoughts. When my mind races, that seems to be one of the most frequent pit stops. The doctor nodded and wrote this down. He then asked Jack whether or not he experienced joy in life. Jack carefully considered the question, then described to the best of his ability the moments of joy in his past. What you're describing, Dr. Keenan finally said, isn't joy, but satisfaction. The distinction intrigued Jack, though he wasn't fully sure he understood it. Of course, he understood it semantically, but on a practical level, on the level of felt emotion, it seemed an exceedingly subtle basis upon which to initiate drug therapy. Jack wondered how Dr. Keenan might advise an alcoholic who always expressed his cravings as, "I want to drink, but never, I need to drink." But Dr. Keenan, here in the distinction between need and want, the basis for two entirely different courses of therapy. But Jack remained eager for the prescription of Prozac and the general sense of well-being it promised. So he put himself in a frame of mind that was keenly empathetic. He gave good answers. He agreed with the psychiatrist that he was satisfied, but not joyful. Once he had the prescription in hand, he followed the doctor's assistants to a small business office down the hall. She was a skinny woman, middle-aged, with tight clothes and wild eyes. She seemed wired as a junkie. She immediately confided to Jack that she was a former client of Dr. Keenan's, which came as no great surprise. Her speech was peppered with loud curses, unconnected to her train of thought. Each time she lit a cigarette, she pointed proudly to the nearest no smoking sign and announced, "I do what I want." It was clear that she believed her swearing and smoking were but the flowers of her burgeoning self-esteem, another step on the path towards sound mental health. "Dr. Keenan is a good cop," she told Jack bluntly. "I'm the bad cop. He can't bring himself to talk about money. If I left it up to him, he wouldn't charge anyone anything. That's why he needs me." She invested the phrase "needs me" with a number of ambiguous meanings. What drugs, Jack wondered, might Keenan prescribe based on the nuances of her inflection? Keenan's assistant then handed Jack a bill for the office visit, $300, and asked him how he'd like to pay. Through the nose. She was not pleased. Behind a cloud of smoke, Jack heard her say, "Cut the shit, Sonny." His first 2 weeks on Prozac, Jack kept a careful record of his interior life. He was minutely sensitive to the fluctuations in his mood. But the only change he observed was a debilitating lethargy, coupled with a mysterious disappearance of his libido. His sex drive simply vanished, as if it were no more than a faucet that had been turned off. A leg amputated. Jack had never before experienced a sensation so profoundly weird. Without the desire, there was nothing left of him. There was no Jack. And needless to say, there was not much left of Dolores either. That's the pseudonym for the sex columnist. As far as he could tell, the only benefit was philosophical. It confirmed his view that life, reduced to its essential elements, is nothing more than a complex sequence of chemical reactions. Jack soon called Dr. Keenan. He used the telephone because the bill for the $300 office visit was still sitting unpaid on his desk. He told the doctor about his missing sex drive. "You understand," Dr. Keenan said, "Prozac, like all fluoxetines, is an anti-obsessional." He let the sentence drift, and during the ensuing pause, both he and Jack passed silent judgment on the precise nature of Jack's obsession. Dr. Keenan then suggested lithium. Lithium required a constant monitoring of the blood, but this inconvenience was offset by fewer side effects. Jack was about to ask why, in that case, lithium hadn't been the initial recommendation, but something stopped him short. In the background, he began to hear the loud curses of Dr. Keenan's assistant. Jack couldn't be sure, but Keenan himself seemed to be the target of this invective. In any event, Dr. Keenan abruptly ended the phone call, and Jack just as abruptly ended his new morning ritual, swallowing 20 milligrams of Prozac with his first cup of coffee. 4 days later, Jack awoke and immediately noticed that something was up. When he looked down at the bed sheets, he smiled. That something that was up was himself. Desire had begun to rise in him like sap. On the street, he found himself contemplating the virtues of the behinds of every woman who passed him by. On the subway, he entertained himself with interesting fantasies about a number of attractive commuters. It was as if he had put on a pair of magic spectacles, which caused him to see the whole world bathed in the light of desire. He got off the train at 72nd Street and walked to the offices of the magazine, himself again, unjoyful but satisfied. Though outwardly calm, his mind raced once more, and for the first time he understood that the fuel was desire. At work, the voice he impersonated, Dolores' voice, returned to him, and by the end of the day, he had made good progress with the backlog of letters piled on his desk. And when he arrived home that night, he found in his mailbox a bill for Dr. Keenan for a telephone conference. Please welcome the wonderful Meg Wolitzer.
That was great. These were all wonderful, so thank you for asking me to be part of this. I'm going to read something pretty old, so I can't vouch for it, but I vaguely remember it was a sort of aggressive humor piece dealing with August and issues of transference. The note was slipped to me on Wednesday, July 20th at 2 minutes before 3. I know the exact time because I happened to be staring at my watch, wondering if Dr. V would be running late today, as she sometimes did, when the double doors burst open and Peacock Throne walked out. I called her that because she had the darkly imperious ethnicity of an Iranian princess, and also, of course, because I didn't know her name. Sometimes she was crying when she came out, her mascara softly running. But today she seemed actually giggly, as though she and Dr. V had been in there exchanging amusing stories about bad dates. Usually Peacock Throne threw me a cursory smile when she left, the smile of a princess to a subject. But now she seemed to veer toward me as she walked through the narrow waiting area littered with old copies of Bon Appetit. I swung my knees to the side to let her pass like someone at the movies, but as I did, she let something tumble deliberately into my lap. I was shocked. In 30 seconds, Dr. V would be poking her head out of the double doors, having done her little preparations for the next patient, which apparently consisted of ripping off a single sheet of Viva paper towel and placing it over the headrest of her couch. I've never understood whether that piece of paper towel was supposed to be for my protection or the protection of her couch, a beige Jennifer convertible covered with a thicket of woolly nubs. Peacock Throne just kept walking, leaving the waiting room and heading outside, the front door clicking quietly shut behind her. In my lap was her carefully folded, slightly used-looking note. I opened it. The note read, "If you are interested in discussing Dr. V with her other patients, please meet outside this building on Monday, August 1st at 12 noon. Also, kindly pass this on to the next patient after your session. Whatever you do, don't tell Dr. V about the existence of this note, and please don't break the chain. Thanks." There were 3 exclamation marks after the last word, and they gave me pause. They seemed such a young and girlish garnish to this forceful letter. Had Peacock Throne written this herself? Or had it been lobbed into her lap by Lighting Booth, the heavy, melancholy man in the rotating collection of Broadway show bomber jackets? South Pacific had recently replaced Guys and Dolls. Or maybe it had been thrust at her by learner's permit, the kinetic teenage boy with the blurry bad skin and beautiful eyes, whose therapy probably consisted of tentative pontifications on whether death really is final. Before I had a chance to sift through the possibilities, the double doors opened again, and Dr. V's head appeared, the quick smile, the scarf, the big blue-framed glasses. I dropped the note into the pocket of my shoulder bag, then walked into her office, where I carelessly tossed the bag over a chair, as always, and headed for the couch. She always made me start. If I were lying there choking on a sour ball, she would not say a word until I managed to emit some guttural farm animal sound. Dr. V seemed so passive that at times I felt as though we were 2 polite strangers occupying different corners of an otherwise deserted subway car, looking everywhere but at each other. On July 20th, I kept quiet about the note and instead began the session by dredging up a minor dream from a few nights earlier, which I'd almost forgotten. I would often leave a single dream in reserve, one which I wasn't sure I even wanted to mention, so that if there was another subject lurking which was too mortifying to discuss, I could always sigh and say, "So I had this interesting dream." The spiral pad and pen would dutifully appear. I could hear them, the paper asserting itself as it crackled on its spool of wire, the big pen clicking into readiness. Dr. V loved dreams, especially dreams about her. As soon as I said, "And you were there," like Dorothy after she returned from Oz and lay in her bed, surrounded by familiar hands and faces, Dr. V instantly perked up. "Oh," she would say, "tell me." On this particular day, I launched easily into the dream, something about my father secretly being the real person responsible for the Salk vaccine. Soon I stopped thinking about the note entirely, and when the hour was up, I was reluctant to go. What if I didn't get up? What if I just lay there ignoring her suggestive rustling? Usually when I stood up and looked at Dr. V at the very end, I would be reminded of how shocking were the things I had said to her only moments earlier. "The mole on my great-uncle's shoulder made me sick," I had cried one day. I told her everything while she remained a cipher to me. I could not even imagine her going home at night. If I pictured her putting a key into a lock, the door would lead only into a dark, empty stock room, not a home. She would never tell me anything about herself, of course, whether she had children, husband. She wouldn't even say where she went every August when she closed up shop. Did she stay in the city like I did, sitting in front of the air conditioner blast, eating takeout kung pao chicken and doing the jumble in the newspaper? Or did she migrate up to the Cape with her husband and their 2 or 3 children, the family car packed with the belongings of the family V? On my way out of the office on July 20th, I slung my bag over my shoulder and closed the double doors behind me. There in the waiting room sat game show host. His hair was high and blown. I could not imagine what men like this discussed with their psychoanalysts. He was so carelessly handsome. He seemed the kind of man who would do better committing himself to one of those bursts of expensive, faddish therapy that involve hundreds of people and take place in the conference rooms of midtown hotels. But here he was, under the quiet, fairly traditional care of Dr. V, just like me. I tossed him the note while gazing into his clear and startled eyes. "Hey, wait," he said, "what is this?" But I was out the door. I said goodbye to Dr. V on the last Thursday of July. I admitted that I would miss her in August. I said that no doubt I would call her answering machine once or twice during the month just to hear her recorded voice and then hang up without a word. The session ended now and I stood awkwardly. She actually smiled, a slight wince as though she'd located a tiny chink of glass in a mouthful of food. And then she reached out to shake my hand. "Goodbye, Susan," Dr. V said, and then our hands were touching, warm palm to warm palm. I was standing close enough to get a more thorough look at her. This happened every August. Last summer, when we shook hands, I noticed that she had a widow's peak, which I have too. My whole life, this widow's peak has been a problem, causing my hair to remain jaggedly parted. I wanted to say, "Look, look," and pull a hang of hair back from my forehead in solidarity, but I didn't. I glanced at her face now, trying to notice some new detail for future use, but all I could see were the things I already knew. She was a middle-aged woman in a scarf and big framed eyeglasses, not unlike the women in my mother's book discussion group. I used to see them whenever the group was held at my parents' house. They arrived with their copies of Middlemarch or Anais Nin's diaries, the text of the book feverishly marked up. Symbolism, they would write in the white space, or how true. I'm not proud of what happened on the first day of August, of what we did and said, or the damage we caused, but it was as though once we started this, we had to finish it one way or another, like an analysis itself. Shortly before 12 o'clock, I stood alone under the awning on East 83rd Street. I assumed that we would all meet here and then go to a restaurant. I pictured a bunch of us crowded into a big wooden booth, nervous and jangly as strangers at a singles bunch. I looked over at the lineup of brass professional nameplates nailed to the outside of the building, the catalog of psychiatrists, psychologists, and the occasional proud MSW who were housed in the first floor offices. Now, though, the offices were silent, and even the white noise machines had been unplugged. Every August, it was as though a virus had wiped out the entire New York population of people in the helping professions. Peacock Throne arrived, and to my surprise, she smiled warmly at me, so I smiled back. Next came Learner's Permit in his high tops and backpack. Then I noticed that a few feet away, Lighting Booth was approaching, humming a song I knew from Fiorello. By 12:10, there were 8 of us in front of the building, several of whom I recognized from occasional schedule changes over the years, a few who I did not. There was a man who I was pretty sure played a young father in an orange juice commercial, and an ethereal woman carrying a battered edition of Proust. Volume 2, I glumly noticed. I myself had never been able to get beyond Volume 1. I imagine that this woman and Dr. V spent their sessions in gentle contemplation of literature, not to mention language itself. She was probably a graduate student who read late into the night, subsisting on bowls of ramen noodles. A couple of patients were still missing, and we gave them a few more minutes leeway, until finally a dark, compact man carrying a strong box arrived and said, "Shall we?" "Shall we what?" Lighting Booth asked. "Well," said the man, "the whole thing was my idea, and I thought we'd just, go in." He turned and walked into the vestibule. We followed him, watching as he squatted down, snapping open his box and removing a few small, serious tools. "I'm a locksmith," he explained. "It shouldn't be very difficult." Within 3 minutes, he had worked open the door to the lobby, then the door to Dr. V's anteroom. The others followed sheepishly behind, stunned at the illegality of this, but undeniably thrilled. The locksmith popped the lock on Dr. V's double doors, and we filed in. The room felt as warm and close as the stage set for a production of No Exit. At first, no one could bear to turn on a light. Then Proust woman began to laugh nervously, and a bony woman in a Laura Ashley sundress switched on the halogen lamp, which flooded the office with that familiar yellow light. The room was orderly, with very few changes. The paper towel on the end of the couch was gone, and so was the plant that usually sat on the window. Lerner's permit went over to the couch and flopped down hard. "Feels good to sit," he said. "I'm sick of lying down. The ceiling is boring." "Did you ever notice," said Lighting Booth, "the way the cracks in the ceiling above the couch form the shape of a baker's hat?" "Not really," said Peacock Throne. "Then can we just get started?" Then she actually sat herself down in Dr. V's chair. We all just stared. It was one thing to break into the office of your psychoanalyst, and another thing entirely to sit in her chair. She switched the chair from side to side. It made a very slight creak and scritch, which I realized I'd heard many times during sessions. "First of all," said Peacock Throne, taking over, "does anyone know where Dr. V goes in August? I mean, really know, not just a guess." "How could we possibly know?" said Laura Ashley. "It's not as though she tells us anything." She paused and added suspiciously, "Why, does she tell you things?" "No," said Peacock Throne, "not a word. But my brother-in-law found out that his analyst spends August in a house in Dutchess County because his friends, who also have a house up there, were talking about this couple who have a house down the road, a psychoanalyst and his wife. And they mentioned that the husband's name was Nathan. And my brother-in-law started shouting, 'Not Nathan Cantor, not Nathan Cantor!' And the friend said, yes, the country neighbor was Nathan Cantor, the psychoanalyst. And they told my brother-in-law all these unflattering things about his analyst, like the fact that he has raspberry shrubs growing all over his property, but he never lets the neighbor's children pick raspberries." Then Proust woman said in a very small, trembling voice, "My theory is that Dr. V goes to France every August. She and I have discussed certain aspects of French life before, and she's always struck me as very sensitive on the subject. I asked her if perhaps she and her family rented a home in Provence, and she didn't disabuse me of the fact." "Fact," said Lighting Booth. "It's not a fact, it's a fantasy, that's all." But I thought to myself, I can see her in France, tooling around the countryside with her family in a rented car, wearing her big blue eyeglasses, using her rusty Seven Sisters French language skills. It made sense to me that even as we all sat here in her office, she and her husband and children were standing with their passports splayed open at the Air France desk at JFK. Suddenly I noticed that the locksmith was starting to go through the drawers of Dr. V's desk. He took out a few papers and we all grew excited, but they merely turned out to be flyers for the annual Fling into Spring blowout at the Karen Horney Clinic. Then he reached deeper inside a drawer and fished out an open pack of Trident, followed by a pen that read Wellbutrin. The objects were passed around for inspection, and Proust woman discreetly pocketed the pen. But these little details brought us no closer to knowing who she was. Just as I began to think that this whole adventure was misbegotten, Laura Ashley suddenly said, "Did you ever notice the way Dr. V really starts to pay attention only when you talk about her? I mean," she continued, "I can be telling a story about the day my father walked out on us, And Dr. V doesn't say a word, but as soon as I say, this reminds me of how angry you make me feel sometimes, she always says, oh, tell me. Several of us laughed bitterly. Oh, tell me, we knew it well. The thing is, said the locksmith, I have no idea whether my analysis is helping me, but I'm very sexually attracted to her, so I enjoy coming here. She has a wonderful body under all those big blousy things she wears and those scars. You know, he continued, many people in my profession undergo psychoanalysis in their lifetimes. It's quite common. Really? I said, I didn't know that. Oh yes, he said. 2 of the other guys at Keys Plus have been in treatment for years. Something about the image of the key in the lock fills us with dread and intense longing. I suppose it's like being small boys and spying on our mothers in the bathroom, learning their intimate womanly secrets. It's all very interesting, of course, and I've been coming here forever, but you know something? Lately I've been thinking I could find better ways to spend my $90. A shocked silence fell. I paid $100 a session. When I first came for a consultation, Dr. V had said her usual fee was $125, but she would lower it to meet the needs of my budget. I felt special, chosen, capped for skull and bones. Yet now, many years later, I was learning that all along she'd been charging the locksmith less. Maybe if I'd pushed her a little more, I could have talked her down. But how could I have known that you could treat a degree-holding psychoanalyst like a Florentine street merchant? We went around the room telling one another how much we paid. Most people were squarely in the $90 to $125 range. I felt relieved that mine wasn't the highest fee. That honor went to Learner's Permit, whose parents, he admitted, paid their son's analyst $150 a session. What can I say, Learner's Permit said, shrugging. My dad's a big fat art dealer. The only person who hadn't revealed the amount she paid was Proust woman. She looked very nervous now, as though hoping everyone would forget about her. But I had to know. You didn't tell us how much she charges you, I said mildly. That's kind of personal, she said. Come on, said Lighty Booth. Nothing's personal here. We don't even know one another's names. The woman uneasily plucked at the spine of volume 2. Well, actually, she said in an apologetic whisper, she charges me $15 a session. We all gasped. I thought there might be an uprising, everyone encircling her in rage, yanking the Proust from her small, pale hands. $15, said Lighting Booth. How could she do that to me? I give her all my money. I can't even afford cable. While she waltzes off to France for the month of August, added the young father. Or should I say off to France for the month of ooh la la, renting a villa, sitting and eating Lake Brioche. And you know what else, said Learner's Permit. I really don't even like her eyeglasses. They make her look so average. Exactly, said Nora Ashley. So undistinguished. Why should we give all our money to such a person? And her answering machine, can you believe that message? Lighting Booth sprang up and went to the answering machine, which sat on its own low table. He pressed a button, turned up the volume, and in a moment we heard that familiar voice over-enunciating into the room. We all laughed, agreeing this was the lamest message ever recorded. When the beep sounded, the locksmith announced that he was going to erase her message and replace it with a new one. We listened, impressed and appalled, as he rewound the short tape and recorded a new message in its place. Hello, he said in his husky baritone, leaning close to the built-in mic. This is Dr. V. In the background, despite our disapproval, we all began to hoot and cheer. I cannot come to the phone right now, he continued, because I am spending August in the south of France on more money. I am having a great time without you, far away from your disgusting little homoerotic fantasy. And your boring dreams, added Peacock Throne. And I found myself piping up, the oil from your hair on my paper towel. I screamed with laughter. There we were, all 8 of us hunched around the answering machine, talking into it and howling when the door opened. We turned and there in the doorway stood Dr. V. They were silent. Behind her stood game show host, bobbing up to peer over her shoulder. You see, he was saying with triumph, I wasn't making it up. For a long time she stood and looked at us. What am I going to do with you, she asked us sadly. I can't quite remember what else she said, so shocking was it to hear her voice. I only know it had something to do with the bonds of trust that we'd broken. Proust woman suddenly interrupted, asking her why she wasn't on her way to France. And Dr. V looked puzzled. France, she said, what gave you that idea? No one could answer. So did you find out what you wanted, Dr. V asked, and her voice was almost kind. None of us could say we'd found out anything. We stared down at our hands or at the rug, and we apologized over and over. Finally, she said we could go and that we would sort this all out individually in September. But I knew that would not happen, at least not for me. I could not imagine that my analysis would be strong enough to withstand the shame I now felt as she looked us over. We said our goodbyes to Dr. V, and we left her office and walked back out into the sunlight like the stunned survivors of a massive wreck. My new therapist does not need to be referred to only by one initial. This isn't Kafka, she said cheerfully. Her name is Linda Manzini, PhD, and her office is located downtown in the West Village in a brownstone that also happens to be her home. The edges of her personal life were occasionally revealed to me by accident. There is a gray, elderly family cat that sometimes makes a brief appearance in the waiting room, and once a package lay in the front hall when I arrived, a delivery from Williams-Sonoma that bore the shape and heft of a cheese board. I always notice the details, but it's really out of habit, not curiosity. Mostly I'm relieved not to be in analysis with Dr. V anymore, but sometimes I do miss the mystery of it all, the pointed silences, the sheets of paper towel, the strange, inarticulate understanding that lived between us. I now sit upright once a week in the palm of a big leather chair that has a slight fall of cat hair on it. And when I speak, Linda Manzini always meets my gaze. She is a motherly and sympathetic woman who wears caftans year-round. I know exactly who she is, and I have to say, I am disappointed.
Thank you so much. Would you guys all come up and answer some questions?
What do you mean by that?
Come on, writers.
Take out my device. Better ask a question.
While you're thinking of your questions, I'm going to take a picture.
Meg, when did you write that story?
In 1998.
Okay, so this is after Prozac, and it's still...
Well, you know, actually, the pen originally said Prozac, and I changed it to Wellbutrin when I was looking over tonight. And also the father, who she recognizes from an orange juice commercial. I noticed with horror was she recognized him from a Bell Atlantic telephone commercial. So that's how old it is. These things age really, really fast.
There's a question there.
And this is for anyone. It would seem that, at least as I was listening, I could not relate to what you were saying in the abstract. I had to have gone through the process myself. And in listening to each one of you, it seemed like you had to have gone through the process. You couldn't just used your imagination. And if you in fact did, do you think it helped or helps your writing?
A general question about therapy you're asking?
I don't think you have to have had an experience to write about it. I really don't.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to think you do.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
You know, I was always drawn to the pharmaceutical cure. But I must say, I always enjoyed the talking. I mean, I always enjoyed talking. And this thing that I wrote came in a period of, you know, really horrible period of my life when I was, you know, desperate to write anything. And it's kind of not like the things I usually write. I tend to write things that are more amusing, not nearly dark, or don't have even that sentence structure. But, you know, I like it. I mean, I think the whole idea of, you know, introspection, talking about your interiors, that, you know, writers tend to think about the interior life obsessively, and I think that's, you know, kind of seamless. And also, I think the creative process is very much what happens in therapy. I mean, a lot of it is, you know, trying to get rid of the censoring mind, you know, to access something that is important, but that we don't have easy access to, and I think writers tend to do that. And the power of these stories, I mean, when you hear how it really is extraordinary, you engage something that's very powerful, that was really compelling. And I've always thought, good stories are better than the people who write them.
I disagree with Meg. I mean, I admire her if she hasn't gone through therapy or analysis, because she imagines some of the psychodynamics even in a fantasy story so well, so hats off. I think you do have to go through something like it, some amount of talk therapy, some amount of introspection with the guidance of somebody else to write this way about the process. And then your second question, which I believe was, did it help your writing? There's no way of saying, I mean, in my answer is a definite yes, but then I have to edge it immediately by saying, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't done it. And that road not taken is so true of many kinds of decisions that I really am at a loss. I can't imagine that I'd be the same writer without it, but I don't know if I'd have written, or if I'd have been introspective in some other way. I don't know, because I did it.
I mean, I guess I feel like I like to at least think theoretically that you can write about what you can think about. I don't think, actually, that someone who hadn't been in therapy would write about therapy. And I have, of course, been in therapy. But I just don't think that it would probably interest them to write about. But you want to think you can write about what you can imagine. Writing about, you do it so wonderfully that writing about therapy can be really deadly in books. It's a hard thing because just even the geometry, it's a back and forth. Often in scenes, if you've got a third person in there, or you get to sort of move around a bit. Although you do move around, they go into the park, right? Isn't it? Yeah, I mean, you're
I got tired.
you break it.
I cannot remember if I did that with any analyst, with any of the two analysts I had. I may have actually gone out, I can't even remember.
That's wild. Yeah. But it's a challenge if you have to keep your characters in a certain enclosed space. I think that's a challenge for a writer, absolutely.
Yeah.
Why are these stories so hilarious? I mean, what are your thoughts about why writing psychoanalysis? I mean, they're profound in many ways, but they're hilarious.
Resistance.
Yes, resistance.
No, I mean, for me, I think that it's such a frightening process when it's working and when you're deeply engaged with it, and when the person that you're working with is knowing and hypothesizing things about you that you don't really know about, that there's an automatic defense mechanism, and it expresses itself for me, I just speak for myself, in a humorous sort of distancing thing that also makes you superior in some elemental way to the analyst. So that is that called countertransference? So I think it's part of the same process, and I think most of us, at least, well, I won't speak for anyone else, I don't really think it was hilarious. I mean, I think it was very serious. I think it was really good. I think it was really bad. And it's a very serious matter. But there's a kind of distancing about this subject. It's so sensitive. You're talking about, homoerotic fantasies and God knows what filth.
You do think your book is hilarious.
That's not for me to say, but if you insist. What do you think about it? Everybody got laughs.
Yeah, Richard,
That's why I'm asking.
I'd like you to answer that too, because every time I read that first line of just seeing your therapist staring at a tree, I just crack up. So I just think,
I don't know, I think in part, if you're going to, I often found that if you're going to write about something really serious, that, and this is probably a lesson from analysis, that you go in the opposite direction, and you can make something, it's the negative space. You make something that's serious, you make it more serious by putting humor in. But I also think that what Dan was saying, there's a lot of merit to it as well.
Also,
a lot of merit makes it sound like some of it didn't have merit. So it has merit.
Some.
Also, I think that it's a kind of, it has sort of these strictures that other things in your life don't have. There's almost like a mythical element to the ritual of it and what you're allowed to say. It's very and yet you're supposed to be talking about, you know, your most intimate thoughts and feelings, and so there's something just funny about sort of strict rules, which might be like from like taking a standardized test, and then you know, talking about your, you know, intimate sexual fantasies. There's just something funny about the rules of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like these characters, you know, the narrator, or the patient, the analysand in these stories all come off sort of jerky and vulnerable in some way. And I guess that kind of intimacy, right, I mean, it's like, anytime you can be sort of vulnerable, but also we see the sort of petty aggressiveness of a character, that's very human. I mean, Philip Roth, who wrote so much in that vein and still does, you could see that it's like they can be as much of a schmuck as they want, because we feel their humanness and we feel how embarrassing it is finally. I mean, two people, right, make these rules and decide, I mean, it's so crazy when you think about it. You go in, you know, if there are real, you know, classical analyses still taking place in the city, you know, in the teens perhaps, but lying down on a couch because someone made this up and said this is the way to do it. But you could take that really far to sort of looking at like people who have sex. It's like you're agreeing to go through these rules and have this intimate thing in a room, and there's something very vulnerable and very human about that, and I think that's what writers want to do. Writers want to get at that. It's formal. That's almost the worst part of it too. It's formal. It's like operatic, almost, you know. But if one of you no longer agrees to do it, the whole thing falls apart. It requires both people to sort of do this pas de deux.
It's like Woody Allen wouldn't be as funny if it wasn't about analysis itself. Just regular therapy isn't as funny as real analysis. And that's, I think, why at the end of your story it's disappointing, because it's no longer that formal agreement between two people and that mythical element that's so formalized and yet supposed to be so intimate. If you put people on a couch, it's funny all of a sudden. It's sitting in a chair, it's not as funny.
To me, actually, right, it's completely true. And to me, what I sort of like about it, what I like about analysis sort of theoretically and in here, is it sort of reminds me of the novel. It's the old tradition of a kind of formal structure and intimacy and following certain kinds of rules, like the big novels that I like. And that we've moved into a different era, where, you know, an era of quick things and short-term counseling and things. But to get to know a character like over a long period of time, it seems to me like an analysis.
Do any of you think that the process of analysis can somehow drain a writer's creativity? Because instead of writing, you're talking, and so what you might otherwise write winds up going through the channel of the therapeutic process?
I think that it's very funny. It reminds me of the question that I've gotten over my life as an editor, which is, do you think that being an editor has hurt your writing or helped it? It's somewhat similar to that. I think that for me anyway, in both cases, there's been a staged answer. I'd say for a while, I think it did interfere and did sort of have a negative friction on the writing I did, or tried to do. And then, I won't say I got beyond analysis, but I will say that it became part of what I had done instead of all absorbing. Same with editing. It became part of what I did. It didn't become all absorbing. So I kind of, the station of editing or being an analysis, I kind of left it, but I never forgot it. But I was able to go beyond it a little bit. I think a lot of people who do creative work who've been in therapy or analysis probably have that staging process where it may be necessary or helpful in their lives or their work, and then I won't say they move beyond it, but they assimilate and continue to use it as part of who they are, and it becomes a tool. I can imagine in some cases that people find, I mean, I think I know some cases where writers have found, where creative people have found that therapy and analysis have been so transformative or possibly even damaging, but I think more usually transformative, that they don't want to do that anymore. They don't want to write anymore. They're not interested. Whatever conflict led to it, whatever difficulty led to it, they resolved and they want to do something else. As happens with many people in analysis when they change their occupation or their profession. I think that is not unusual.
I think if you want to write, I mean, if you really want to write, you'll write. And if being an analysis stops you from writing, then something else would have stopped you from writing too, I suspect. But being an analysis can also, if you feel that it's stopping you. Well, I mean, I think about Hitchcock, and he was always asked, well, wouldn't you like to get to the root of your whatever it is that's creating all these, the suspense and the anxieties and everything, and the obsession with blonde women and all of the stuff in his movies. And he said no, because then it would destroy his art. And I don't think so. I mean, I think it could actually, if you're so inclined, it can deepen it. You can begin to understand what's going on, and then you can explore even further. And then you don't make a movie like Topaz.
A slightly different take on why that this world appeals to me. I come at it a little bit as an outsider. I mean, I grew up in Alabama, and and grew up in some sense in the middle of the most important story of the 20th century in America. Of the Birmingham in the 1960s, and was I dying to write about the most amazing story that I was participating in? No, I was dying to write about, to be a tortured, self-destructive, chain-smoking poet, and write about Harvard and Boston. And so in some sense, the whole world of analysis for me is a kind of, aspiration of a New York affectation. No, I mean, I'm absolutely, it's basically an outsider is wanting to play the role of a New Yorker. And what better way to do it? And so for me, it really is, I like it for those reasons. I also, for the same reasons, write about English departments, which are also easy targets, the same kinds of jokes, the same kinds of rituals, the same kind of crust that you break through. And there is a kind of aggression that goes with the humor. You kind of make the target smaller. But there's also, you hear a kind of affection for it as well. I mean, I don't think that any of the humor you heard tonight was brutal. I mean, I think it was kind of affecting. And so it's kind of the same way, I think about English departments. I mean, I make fun of them, but, I kind of admire people who care about literature and stuff like that. So.
As I was listening to all of these, very different and all very engaging, it occurred to me that psychoanalysis might be a great subject because there's a lot of conflict and a lot of power struggles within a couple of people in one room. So you get the struggle within oneself, fighting with yourself, then you get the struggle with the therapist, and then there's the other patients, like in Meg's story, it's like sizing them up. It just seems to be everybody on the edge, like just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like really ready to go off. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, in writing characters, there are always two levels of conflict. There's the outer conflict where the person is engaging with the other person, so it's man against nature, man against whatever the other character, and then there's also the internal conflict, which is a mirror of that external conflict, and that's what I think you're saying you can see in therapy. That except it's more. I mean, the great thing that Freud did was he took the unconscious, which was out there. The idea of the unconscious was very much present, but he said instead of making it the subtext, let's make it the text, and let's look at that. So it's kind of what I think what you're saying.
I think, I enjoyed all the pieces, and I laughed my head off, but I think underneath all of that there is a kind of resentment about the inequities of the analytic situation. And I think all these pieces were written quite a while ago, right? So pretty much around the same analysis.
Around the same years.
I mean, I'm sure most people know.
It's not funny.
Maybe some of you should come to our meetings.
Well, it felt a little quaint to me. Yeah, it felt, as I was reading this, because I was, 1998 was like everybody's. That's so weird. It felt sort of quaint and like I was writing about something that was past. But then I felt sort of protective of it too, because I think I am the beneficiary of a long analysis, and I think it's helped my work tremendously, and I feel it's a strange, wonderful thing a writer can do for him or herself, and I think that that's falling away from the world. And
Would you feel comfortable if I would hear it?
yes. Yes. She's mine.
Health insurance was a lot better in the 90s. It covered a lot more stuff. I worked at the New Yorker, and half the people scurry away to analysis because, you know, half or 70 or 80% of the cost would be covered. So we were the beneficiaries of a more generous insurance time.
It has a kind of innocence about it, writing about it too. Yeah, it really, really does. I mean, it just,
Yeah, I think there's something sweet about it. I mean, especially in yours, there's a lot of affection. And
Yeah, there's a lot of aggression and a lot of affection.
yeah, that's
well,
part of
that's,
what makes it
you know,
good.
that is any novel that you're going to read, it's affection and aggression. I mean, they're all there. They're kind of duking it out in some
Yeah.
way. Often they're muted, but I mean, and it's frightening to sort of, right, I mean, the great people say, oh, I don't believe in Freud, or Freud has been discredited, or things like that. I mean, Richard wrote a book on Freud and Einstein, and one thing that we've discussed a lot is really the notion that, okay, well, you can say with the whole Frederick Cruz thing, Freud's been debunked, but everybody basically across the boards agrees that, believes in the power of the unconscious. And any fiction writer is talking about text and subtext. And, you know, somebody said, well, you know, what's chick lit? This came up recently in our, oh, well, you know, doesn't have subtext. It's not interested in subtext. Because that's what we're all interested in. There's two levels always going on in any conversation. I always think, though, in terms of free association, that the internet age has given us something far more accurate about sort of looking at sort of stream of consciousness. If you look at what you've been doing on the internet, like over a given day, you would know what you are. It is unedited. If you were in a room alone with a machine and you think no one can ever see it, as opposed to the sort of tailored, edited statements that you make to an analyst thinking that it's absolutely free. I think that it would be kind of an interesting thing to see if that sort of is used in that way.
Yeah.
It's scary.
That's what your biographers
Oh my God.
turn to instead of your written journals. Your
Why was
history.
she was obsessed with cheaptravel.com. Her father was cheap. You know, like,
How sexy was it to write about New York and putting the analysts or putting the situation in New York as opposed, we kept, and if be tempted to put it somewhere else, and the myth of Manhattan analysis.
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm a New York guy, and not all my fiction or nonfiction has been about New York, but most of it has. It never occurred to me, I suppose, because it is the sort of main container in our country anyway of the influence of analysis. I suppose people have been in analysis in other cities. I just don't know. Maybe not.
Argentina.
Argentina.
Nazis feeling really guilty.